evening. Welcome to all of you. It is tremendous to see you, those of you who are here in person, and it's great to see those of you who are online. You know me, I'm Leslie Vinjamori, President and CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Today we are on the record, and I am completely and utterly delighted to welcome you, Samir, Dr. Samir Saran, President of Observer Research Foundation, to Chicago, to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. If you would indulge me, I will say just a few words about Samir. I've known you, Samir, I don't know, for maybe a decade. Anybody who kind of follows the world of global affairs, India, clearly knows about you and knows about Observer Research Foundation. And if you don't, this is a tremendous opportunity to kind of begin what with Samir is always a journey. It's never a sort of one-stop shop. Several of us were very fortunate to share a lunch this afternoon where we learned even more, yet more about the work that you're doing in India, across the Middle East, across Southeast Asia, frankly, across the globe. In addition to being president of the Observer Research Foundation, which began, you were there from the origins, and it's grown to be the most significant and globally relevant think tank, certainly in India and far beyond. You also curate the Raisina Dialogue, which takes place every winter in India. It's not winter in India when we're there, but it's winter in Chicago. And many other things. You are chair of the Global Future Council on Geopolitics at the World Economic Forum, author of 5 books, one of which I was gifted today, and it's at home because I'm taking it with me for the holidays. Geotechnography, mapping power and identity in the digital age. You are also founder of Sci-Fi, an annual conference on cybersecurity and internet governance, and many other things. So I'm going to let you tell us more about that. Today, we're going to have a conversation about India, about India at home, India abroad, India in the world, and we will obviously talk about India and the United States, but I want to leave that for a little while, because I think once we start talking about the United States and India and the current period, we're going to kind of stay there for a little while. So let's start further back. Maybe before we talk about India and where it is today, could you just tell us a little bit about your own journey? How did you come to this world? As I understand it, you started out in the private sector. You weren't really going into it to be a sort of, famous globe-trotting Indian leading the conversation on geopolitics.
So Leslie, thank you. Thank you for having me, and Mike, thank you for the hospitality and for your leadership. And let me congratulate both the Chicago Council and Leslie for having discovered each other. I think this is going to be a great match, and I'm determined that because of this alignment, we need to be here. And I've actually challenged Leslie that from next year, ORF and the Council should jointly host a big event that discusses global questions in Chicago, not necessarily relegated to just the India-US lane, maybe a global conversation, but with these 2 large democracies at the core of it. And I think that could be a conversation that could help build the next generation of relationship between India and the US. My journey, yes, I was in the private sector. At some point after 14 years in the private sector, I felt I was not fit for purpose. It took me a while. The first part of my life was basically, in many ways, my father telling me, this is the degrees you have to chase, this is the job you need to do, this is the person you need to live with, and I did all of that. And then somewhere in the 30s, I became my own man, and I went back to college and I re-educated myself, and I stumbled into a think tank, which, by the way, was not there since the origin, which was already close to 18 years old when I joined it. It was an institution that was coming into its own in 2008 when I joined it, and I've been there since then. So I've been there for half of its journey. But Raisina, yes, I was there when we built it from scratch, and I'm delighted that we have that I have been present when we gave birth to ORF Mumbai, ORF Kolkata, ORF DC, and like Dhruva is here, who's I would say is the co-founder of that particular initiative. He came down and he built it up during the pandemic. The now ORF Middle East in Dubai. So I've stumbled into this sector because the private sector wasn't a place that I thought was meant for me. I wasn't good at what people do, which is make money. I'm good at making conversations, and that's what I invested in.
So my first year at the Raisina Dialogue, it began in the opening with Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Modi, and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. They opened the session. I think that was 2022.
That's right. 22. That's right. Just when we were opening up from the pandemic.
Exactly.
That's
and
right.
Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I then returned the following year. And it was extraordinary because the Americans always turn up at the highest levels, but they really made a very singular effort to be at the Raisina Dialogue that year, in large part, correct me if you think this is inaccurate, to lobby the Indians to really get behind the UN Security Council's resolutions and UNGA's efforts to condemn Russia for its illegal invasion of Ukraine. And I say this because it is what's remarkable, and it's changed every year, right? The next year, I think, was the year that you were convening, India was convening the G20, you were leading the Think 20. I say this because it really has become a place for influencing at the highest levels. People send delegations for different reasons in different years. How do you, before we sort of talk about India, how do you conceive of what it is and what your aspiration for the Raisina Dialogue has been?
Leslie, for me, we are a platform, and different people use it for different purposes. I jokingly tell people that in 2025, earlier this year, we had 1,876 international arrivals for 200 speaking roles. So clearly they were not coming there to speak. They were coming there to do all sorts of things, meeting each other, meeting others, building up plans together. It's a platform where global thought leaders, upcoming leaders, young voices meet and make magic mostly outside the rooms. The conversations we host on the stage are the fillers. It's if you're bored and you have nothing else to do, you can come inside the room, and we have enough of them all through. But I think the Americans came in 2023 to meet Lavrov. I think they were there because Lavrov was coming, and I think there was this accidental meeting between Blinken and Lavrov as well at Raisina, right? So I think the Americans come there.
I think it was 22.
22, that's right.
I think it was literally just after the invasion.
That's right.
I think it was March of 2022.
So I think they were there for meeting Lavrov. That's the year Blinken came. And you had the whole American entourage that came. Sorry if I get some of my dates wrong. But I can also tell you that lots of American think tanks, for example, reach out to us, particularly with the purpose of meeting the Russians at Raisina. So, look, we are a place which benefits from the remarkable convening India has enjoyed since its independence. We have Iran and Israel in the same room. We have Taiwan and China in the same place. We have Russia and now everyone else in the same space. So, we are a platform. We try to make it inclusive, and we make sure that people are able to have at least some element of what they seek in the world of, in this crazy world of international affairs, delivered to them at Raisina. That's what we do.
And as you mentioned briefly, but there is an extraordinary commitment by Raisina. I always love the large hall where the emerging leaders sit collectively together. They ask the first question. They're from around the globe. It really is a flagship, and it's something that we take very seriously here at the Chicago Council. But I want to draw on something that you just said, and the way that you sort of describe the Raisina dialogue. It's sort of, I guess it mirrors how many of us think about, at least in one sense, how India has tried to position itself, certainly in the aftermath of the Cold War, but even during the Cold War. This, what was originally, I think, called non-alignment, now some people say multi-alignment. Can you tell all of us how you understand India, its geopolitical positioning, both how, I guess, the officials would describe it and how you would describe it, perhaps critique it, or how you sort of understand India's global positioning right now, and what is a very challenging period, clearly.
Understanding India is a journey. I don't think it's a university program, right? So we are complex, we are layered, we are non-linear, and we are non-binary. In our thoughts, in our choices, in our directions, in our even assessments of issues, right? I would argue that much of what our foreign policy is represents, in a nutshell, the cultural vibe of who we are as individuals, as people, as dwellers of that subcontinent called India, Bharat, right? So I think one of the biggest challenges I have had as someone who has lived a lot in Western capitals, in New York and London, I have always found it difficult to explain that the world is not binary. The Occidental mind and the Oriental mind have not been able to reconcile this big difference. We don't think in black and white, we live in grays. And most people like to arrange their lives in these neat black and white segments. We love grays. You made it into a movie, but that's our life, right? For us, there is a whole spectrum of affection, of assessments, of positions vis-a-vis countries, vis-a-vis people, and multi-alignment strategic autonomy stems from that we refuse to condemn someone as pure black or pure evil, right? And that's what the Europeans and Americans love to do through their daily headlines in newspapers. We don't do that. I keep telling people that we had 200,000 troops on the border. It's a few years ago, 5 meters away from another 200,000 troops from the other side, the India-China, standoff, face-off on the mountains. And yet, both China and India found ways of growing trade by 6 to 7%. So imagine that happening in a Western capital where the first thing would be sanction them, put them onto a negative trade list. They are pure evil. Just think about that, right? So we are complex for the Western mind. We are quite simple for being us.
So let me push you a little bit on this, but also to just draw it out a little bit, because I guess.
But look, strategic autonomy was also a product of the times we were born, right? In 1947, the time we gained our independence, it was also a product of that time that a country as large as, and a country that has a sense of self, of being one of the largest economies of the world for 16 out of the 20 centuries that we had lived through at that particular moment, did not want to be a B team of anyone else. It wanted its own space, and it wanted to create a third space, and the third way, right? That's what we are discussing today. So the idea here was that a proud country refused to be in anyone's corner. And I think that's a valid, impulse. It's a valid ambition as well. And many countries have that, by the way. We could do it most visibly and vocally because of the size. But the fact was that we required to band together a number of other countries to be able to create a forum such as the non-aligned movement eventually, or even now the various other plurilaterals that have emerged in the 21st century. But you required in Indonesia, you required in Egypt, you required a Yugoslavia at that point, and you required a number of other countries who came together and who decided that yes, we will not be in the corner of actor A or actor B, at that time USA and USSR, and we would find a space that would allow us our political agency and political decision making. And it was in many ways also thrust upon us. We had to respond in the way we did. And by the way, we liked it there. It was not easy. Many argue that we were not able to benefit from the largesse of American diplomacy that some of our other countries in the region enjoyed, in the developing world enjoyed. But we built our country irrespective of our relationship with America, right? So someone asks me, what does the Trump presidency do to India? And you told me don't go to India, US. I said it does.
We're going to get
I said it makes life interesting, but it doesn't. It is not something that mortally scares us, right? Because our foreign policy, our economic policy, our place in the world is with an America that was largely antagonistic. Was an America that actually was not too fond of us in our formative years, right? In the first 50 odd years, we did not have the best of relationships, although we did significant work together, and that's something we can discuss later. But we exist, and we are, and we traverse the world of today because of the fact that we are a country that makes its own decisions.
So let's talk about multilateralism and sovereignty. And when I worked with you, for you, as part of your leadership of the Think 20 during India's leadership of the G20, which is, as you know, the US's role now to lead the G20. I sat on the working group for reformed multilateralism. I sat in on many meetings, as did all of us who traveled to India, where we listened to your leaders, yourselves, say how important it was to reform the UN, for India to have a seat on the Security Council, to reform the WTO. I mean, things that I think personally I very much agreed with. I think one question is, when those Americans traveled to India after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, one thing that they kept saying was, you're India, you care about multilateralism, you care about the UN, you want this seat, and we're condemning Russia for something that's very clear, right? It's a violation of sovereignty. You don't have to talk about democracy. You don't have to talk about human rights. You don't have to talk about who's right and who's wrong. It's just, why not take a stand given your commitment to the UN and your aspirations? And I ask this not to interrogate in any way, shape, or form. It's more to understand, what was India's thinking on why not to sort of stand up and say, we're on the side of the UN Charter, right? And so therefore we will kind of tick the box and line up with all those other countries that have condemned what was seen to be clearly an illegal transgression of a sovereign nation.
So I'll respond to this, but let me give you my assessment of my conversations with the Americans at that time. Unlike the Europeans, the Americans did not really ask us that question. So let me also tell you this, that it was the Europeans who wanted us to stand on the side of the UN Charter. The Americans understood what we were doing. So let me be very honest. The American thinkers, foreign policy practitioners, and political leaders who I have met during that period understood what India was doing and why it was doing. It was the Europeans who still continue to ask us, why are you not voting on the side of the UN Charter? And my response to that is that in an ideal world, we should be voting for the UN Charter, each one of us. And each of us should be defending the concept of the much larger concept of of sovereignty in the international architecture, of a rules-based order, of integrity of territory, in territorial integrity, and or everything else that we have signed on to when we became members of the United Nations, right? So that's the ideal world. In the real world, you have friends and you have relations and you have important dynamics that have served your security, your safety, your growth, your economic prosperity. I mean, look, America bombed Iraq to the Stone Age. Where was the rules-based order then? And since you have just moved here from UK, did UK vote against the Americans at the UN? Did you stand for the UN Charter? Did you defend the sovereignty of a people? It's not that everyone in UK was applauding.
I was in Washington at the time, just so you know.
Oh, good. So you were bombing Iraq. Okay. Well done. So we should have voted against you. But my point here is that there are relationships. There are relationships which are real. Relationships that have served people, served causes, served continents. The US-UK relationship was a relationship forged during some of the most critical periods of human history, including, getting us through the 40s, the big war, right? Now, America does terrible things occasionally. I don't see UK voting against it ever. Or any of its friends, by the way. I think the Germans abstained, or Germans probably, in the case of Libya or one of the
Libya, 2011. I believe.
I think that was the time when the Germans moved away from the pack and they took a stand which was different and perhaps abstained. I have not seen any Western country vote against Western transgression. I've never seen it. Why? Because your relationship is important for the foundational stability of the architecture you have invested into. And good people do bad things, you don't condemn them. And that's again a very, very Occidental thing. Oh, he's made a mistake, so now condemn him. If he's our person, forgive him. If he's someone else's person, condemn him. We don't work like that. For us, the Russia relationship was significant. And yet we were so deeply disappointed in Russia's actions that we abstained. Now imagine a country that has used its veto so many times in India's favor, watching its friend abstain and not support it. We were not among the countries who voted for Russia. The message was not to Europe or America, the message was to the Russians that we like you so much and yet we abstain because we disapprove of what you have done. We are not with you on this. So if you look at the vote, which was abstention, and the readout along the vote when we gave our statement, the statement was an attack on Russian action. The voting was abstention, right? So you tell your friend we are not with you by abstaining, and you make a strong statement against the actions, but you don't throw them into the ditch.
When you spoke at Chatham House, on the record, so I can mention it, not so long ago, maybe a year ago, you also, in talking about this moment, you made what I thought was a very important point, correct me if I'm wrong, that you felt, I'm not saying whether I agree with it or not, but I think it was very important, that you felt that India felt that it has and was playing a very important role. So this is a year ago, pre Donald Trump's second inauguration and second term, that India was playing a very important role in keeping a dialogue that had sort of closed off in the aftermath of the invasion, and that this was also part of India's role. So maybe you could say a little bit before we move to the United States about, India's positioning, its relationship with Russia. Is it changing? Its relationship with China. And then thirdly, and very importantly, and this really came out during the year of G20 leadership, how India sees itself vis-a-vis, I know to use that terrible term, the global South.
I think that's
three big parts.
India sees itself as part of the global South. we are perhaps in many ways the clutch of countries who have marshaled the energy of the South to ensure that spaces around development, around technology, around innovation and growth were accessible to the billions that were not part of the Atlantic system, right? So in that sense, we are the global South. So what we do and how we behave and how we interact is a Southern reality. It's not. We don't have to. We don't have to put an effort to be part of the South. We are the South, right? And we are as layered as many of our other Southern countries who form part of the global South. But it's equally true that due to our history, we are also very aligned in many ways to Western institutions, Western education, Western financial systems. Increasingly, our innovation and technology and knowledge space is absolutely in sync with what's happening in this country, right? So, as a friend of mine said, India is probably the world's first Southwest country. We are the global South, but we are Western in certain aspects, and we are a bridge country. Therefore, now this is a very important and a unique position to be in. We all know that the South is rising. 2/3 of all global growth in this year has been contributed by emerging and developing countries, and up to 60 to 70% of all growth in the next 20 to 30 years is going to come from Africa and Asia and Latin America. Now, in this reality, as the South rises, many of those countries are going to make choices. Do they want political systems? What is the nature of those systems? What is the format and attributes of those systems? They can go east and look at China as a possibility. Efficient, delivers big infrastructure at scale, and can lift people from their misery and challenges. That's one model. The other is they could look at a country like India, democratic, complicated, complex, and yet has lifted millions and millions and hundreds of millions in the last decade alone out of extreme poverty, abject poverty. Has created a different model, maybe not as exciting and as fast, but certainly more interesting and more inclusive than the other one, right? So we are a counterpoint that there is a different way for the global South to rise. And I think our presence is an example. And you asked me, and I'll come back to the first part of the question. So our being a global South country that is making choices that are on the same spectrum, in the same spectrum as the choices that some of the OECD and Western countries have made, is a positive global development and offers the world a chance to be far more democratic, far more inclusive, and far more accountable to the people that they serve. So that's one model. Now, on the first part of it, on Russia and China, and let me come back to Russia, but let me start with China. On China, look, what India seeks with China is what every country around the world has wanted from China. We want to benefit from China's economic growth. There is no different aspiration in New Delhi. If there was a simple way of benefiting from China's economic growth, having fair trade, having open and transparent arrangements for transfer of innovation and knowledge and creating value together and building industries and businesses together, infrastructure together, we would jump. We want a deep economic engagement with China. But as many of us have seen, economic integration with China comes with political consequences. You have to find ways of responding to the encroachments that we see alongside all Chinese economic activities. Political encroachments, challenging sovereignty, changing history, rewriting facts on the ground, the islands in the South China Sea, right? We see a political muscularity accompanying Chinese economic embrace. So the only way you will deal with China, and that's been my line for a while, is to find that impossible space where you can give them a warm economic embrace and exude tough political muscularity. Be tough and be warm. At the same time, we are all trying to find that space where we can exhibit both these virtues, but that is the only way you can deal with China, right? So I suspect that we are going to have continued ebbs and flows with China over the next decade. I'm not going to write off the possibility of having a couple of other incidents like we did a few years ago in the coming 5 to 6 years, which I believe are the years when the asymmetry between us is at the peak. In the 2030s, that will change. We will have sufficient capabilities to make Chinese adventurism costly, and we will be sufficiently big to excite them with the economic possibility.
When do you date this?
Early 2030s, when we reach $7 to $8 trillion, we become an exciting option. By the way, I think their assessment of India has started to change already. So we are not the $2 trillion India, we are the $5 trillion India. It's going to become different by the time we reach 8 to 9. But even if it doesn't, we would be able to achieve capabilities to do to them what the Chinese did to the Americans in the middle of the last decade, to make adventurism costly. Everyone has been very careful with their China pronouncements, China activities. Now you announce your freedom of navigation operations weeks in advance. Earlier you used to believe it was your pond. In some sense, that the approach of many of the countries has really changed because of the deterrence and defense capabilities China has built in. And I think as a $7 to $8 trillion economy, when your budgets grow and you can invest in those capabilities and technology platforms and develop your indigenous solutions, you will see a change of approach.
Let me ask you a question on this. How critical, and I know we're going to talk about Russia too, but how critical is the United States to India's ability to develop you say indigenous capabilities, but how, up until recently, we were seeing some pretty, transformative agreements between the U.S. and India in the military and technology space. Is that relationship critical to India getting where it wants to be when it comes to deterring China?
Answer is yes and no. Yes, the India-US relationship is absolutely vital if we want to accelerate and fast track this process of where we want to be. No, because eventually it is a do-it-yourself world, and we will have to build our capabilities ourselves. Partnerships matter up to a point, and beyond that, it will have to be national industries, national capabilities, national policies, national, approaches to responding to the Chinese propositions, which will matter most. America is vital, but so is Russia, right? I keep telling people that if you really want to understand India's role in this complex world, and that was the part of the question that you asked me, think about this. We have, and I'm giving you one small example. I wrote about it last year as the year was ending, 2024, December. I wrote a piece that 2025 will be the year of Russia for India. That was my piece. This was before Trump was sworn in. It turned out to be the year of Russia for India for many reasons. But I remember writing in that piece that we have a missile system called the BrahMos missile, right? Which is a supersonic, very capable missile system that was also in operation most recently in our border conflict or border skirmish, whichever way you want to describe it. But when we were engaging in the anti-terror operations, Operation Sindoor. But look at that missile system. It's a joint venture between Russia and India, produced out of India. It is been sold to the Philippines, who have deployed it as a means to deter China, Russia's best friend. Right? And of course, Philippines benefits a lot from monetary and other aid from the United States of America. And this is globalization India style. that we are partnering with the Russians to strengthen Philippines to take on the Chinese with the support of the Americans. And in that sense, that is the role we play in this world. And I think that's a good role. That's a good role to play. That we are able to bring together actors to work together on specific projects and ideas that are useful. Technology is the same. There are many examples of technology. Our payment systems. If any of you have internet working in this room, and I'm sure many of you do, you can go to a website called mosip.io, MOSIP.io. It will tell you the number of the hundreds of millions of people outside of India who are using the India Digital ID stack, our open source solution, which is free of cost, non-proprietary, non-predatory, and we don't steal your data. So you build your own open source, and I think the number should be 160 million. I don't remember exactly, but 160 or 150 million folks, 11 countries who have rolled it out, 28 who are playing with it and experimenting with it. But that's our job, that we have built technology capabilities in partnership with our friends in California and other parts of the world, and we are offering them to the global south so that they can build their own proprietary architectures, right? So that they are not owned by the big tech or the big 4 or 5 companies who have their headquarters in this country.
The circle that you describe, it sort of turns out to be virtuous, one could argue. But it's very interesting because when you think about America, its power and its exercise of power and how it's received globally, one of the number one words that people across the global south refer to as America's hypocrisy. And the reason that one of the reasons that they talk about America's hypocrisy is because America espouses a very clear value proposition about what it stands for. Democracy, sovereignty, or it did. Things are changing. It's being contested right now. But sovereignty, democracy, human rights, liberal values. What is India's value proposition? Because it sounds
Harmony,
very transactional.
Inclusion, and community.
But in its foreign policy.
Exactly this. And celebrating diversity. And once you put these together, you have many of those attributes you have mentioned within it. But most important is the fact that we are not the same, and we should not try to force our formats on others, right? And I think that is the main difference between Indian and American foreign policy. Ours is thou shalt not preach. So, and in America, every time you have a democratic government, hypocrisy becomes the word.
To be fair, it was a Republican government that in U.S. administration that invaded Iraq, not if I remember my history right.
That's right.
So it's both sides of the aisle. It's not just one. There seems to be a change now. The recently released national security strategy could be read, not with respect to Europe, but with respects to some parts of the globe as being much more, we're not going to kind of push our values into other people's countries inside of their borders. That's certainly not the case with Europe. But we're going to get to America because we have 7 minutes before we open it up to everybody else. And it has been an American and Indian moment this year, for sure. Many of us, perhaps not you, I don't know, but I want to know. Many of us have been saying for a very long time, if there's increasingly America's foreign policy is no longer garnering bipartisan consensus, with the exception of India.
That's true.
Republicans like India, Democrats like India, everybody believes in this relationship. It seems geopolitically obvious, geoeconomically advantageous, socially and economically, aligned, two greatest democracies. We know the mantra. And here we are. It's sort of busted up in the most extraordinary and quite frankly, disappointing way that many of us could have imagined. Were you surprised? What do you make of it? And how long will this go on? How long will this rupture continue?
Was I surprised? Yes, I was shocked. and I think if anyone pretends that they weren't, they are saints. And we must honor them with a
How would
temple
you
of their own.
describe what happened? Like, how would you, I mean, we know the facts, but how would you kind of capture what happened?
You know, you have a bipartisan consensus on India. And by the way, you also have a very strong across the aisle consensus in India on America. And that was the moment we were in. And then suddenly you have Donald Trump who emerges.
Who used to be very strong proponent of India, arguably stronger than the Democrats even. In his first administration.
Who in his first iteration really, in many ways, decided to move America in certain directions that were, that by the way, Biden administration continued. So in some sense, his China policy, his betting on his revival of the Quad and putting energy back into the Quad and making it a potent grouping, and many others were rational policy actions, right? Trump 2.0 has been a surprise, and I think anyone who says that they haven't been surprised, really, I want to meet them. But look, at some level, Trump 2.0 has been one of the biggest political comebacks in democratic history anywhere in the world. In some sense, we have a man who's charged, who's incarcerated, who's vilified, and yet he finds it within himself to continue the journey, galvanize people, tap into the perceptional vulnerabilities, and build a campaign that is able to bring him back to office, and with a significant majority, right? So Trump 2.0 has been in some sense, a phenomenal journey. And a phenomenal journey required him to challenge his own thinking if he had to come back. So Trump 2.0 was never going to be Trump 1. That was known. But but his assessment of the world has changed accordingly, right? I think the questions that Trump is asking of India and of everyone around the world are fair. His questions are: is trade fair? Is immigration policy correct? Is the identity of America being diluted or being in many ways freighted away due to the imports of different sorts of folks? He's asking the right questions that many around the world would also be having discussions around in their own settings, right? He's not asked he's asking the difficult questions quite starkly. And fair questions to ask. I'm not sure the conclusions that Trump 2.0 is reaching are necessarily the best ones, or the most sensible ones. And I think it's too early to reach a conclusion. But I think that will be an interesting journey to follow. However, we have been one of the collaterals, and for me, the basic reason of the India-US relationship taking this dive that it has is primarily because of what we started this conversation with. That we are a country that deeply treasures, respects, and loves its strategic autonomy. When we were a country which had an empty bank balance, we still defended our space in the world in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Today, with the means that we have, it's tough, but it's a attribute of our national identity, autonomy, that we will defend. Now, America is not used to having partners who are not poodles on their lap. They are not used to having to deal with a country as a friend and as an ally and as someone who they can grow, work together with, who sees itself of similar stature, similar size, similar exceptionalism, similar quirks and craziness, right? And we are one of those. So I think in some sense, at some point, our relationship required a reset in any case. This is as good a time as any. The old format would not have taken us too far. It was based on basically removing the legacy of history in some sense, where in the 20th century we were distant, And India was subjected to sanctions, nuclear apartheid, all sorts of economic levers were deployed against us. Our neighbors were strengthened and emboldened to conduct a quasi conflict and a permanent state of war against us. We were in a bad state in the 20th century. The 21st century, the first 2 decades, was about rectifying that the past, and it was largely based on the belief in folks in the White House at that time, George Bush mainly, but his successors endorsed it to a degree as well. Was about a future partnership with India that would be critical for American interests in the 21st century. I think that was where we were. There was a bit of romanticism in it. There was and there was also a bit of guilt in it, that they were undoing the past and they were trying to build a future. I think that moment was going to go at some point. It's gone. Now we have to think about building a real relationship where America will have to deal with a democratic country. For the first time, that will be $10 trillion in the next decade. That will be $15 to $20 trillion in the next 15 to 20 years. And that will probably be as big as America in the middle of the century. Now, that's a reality the US has to deal with. And it will have to think of a partnership it can forge with a country as big, as proud, and as stubborn as we are, right? And as crazy as itself, in some sense. Now, we are loud, argumentative, crazy countries. And we all have individual opinions about everything, and we change our mind twice or thrice a day. That's how Americans and Indians are. So it's not easy to deal with us, right? And when two of them are sitting on the table, it's lots of fun. Now, from an Indian perspective, I think India also has to see. And so America has to think about a partnership with someone as big, and India has to think about alignment, meaning more than just the words you sign on a paper document, and living it through action. So multi-alignment does not mean that you will not do anything for anyone. It means you will do certain specific tasks with certain specific people at certain specific times, certain specific objectives. And you have to walk that line, right? And we have to think about multiple commitments rather than multiple ambiguities when we think about foreign policy in the future. We are now a big power. There are expectations on us. People want us to take responsibility, want us to contribute to the global public goods, which we have done dramatically, which we have increased dramatically since the turn of the century in terms of being first responders in our disaster relief and resistance efforts. The COVID vaccine, we shipped to 125 countries when, people were hesitant to deliver vaccines. So we are beginning to take that role, and it will have to continue to grow. And eventually we will have to be investing in peace and stability around the world as well. So at some point we will have to be an actor that bears the burden of stability that will deliver the growth that is accruing to us. At 4% GDP, global GDP, we contribute 17% of growth. So we are the largest engines of growth, and we are going to remain one of the largest providers, engines of global growth for a while. And for that, we need a world that is stable, predictable, and more peaceful, right? So in that sense, we will have to start investing in it. And I think over the next 3 years or 4 years, these are the conversations the two countries need to have. I think we are in a period of a decadal transition from the old to the new. We are going to have exciting moments. We are also going to have difficult and tough moments. So in some sense, if you work in the academic and think tank world, lots of things to write on. For my colleagues,
I'm
this
going to
is
come
very
to the audience. I still want to ask you about the G20 and many other things, but let me see who might have a question. Anastasia, I'm going to let you choose because you know this audience even better than I do. And please say your name and your affiliation.
Hi, my name is Will Kelly. I'm with Frontora Capital. Thank you for such an interesting conversation. And I asked this question a bit naive on India's role in the world, but it seems to me you spoke about China having to react to the sort of transgressions of China, and it seems to me that India's foreign policy has been a bit reactive. I think of other countries that are maybe at the crossroads of East and West. Turkey, the Gulf states, even Kazakhstan, who I think in the past few years have seen a rise in their status, where it feels to me that I'm just not sure what the goal is, what the sort of grand ambitions are of Indian foreign policy. I mean, what is being accomplished by refusing to extradite Sheikh Hasina? I guess, what's the ultimate goal?
So the question is, what is India's ambition, or the question is Sheikh Hasina?
India's ambition.
Yeah, okay. No, I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Are we connecting some more together, or do you want me to?
Well, we're going to let you take that one.
Okay. Look, our ambitions are very clear. We have to move 17% of humankind from $3,000 per capita income to $10,000 per capita income in the next 15 to 17 years. It's a global public good. We are lifting the largest cohort of humanity from a state that was quite low to a state which is of their well-being and of their and a better standard of life. That is India's most important priority and single most important objective over the next 15 to 20 years. We are going to be development obsessed because that is what we need to deliver. So that's the number one Indian priority, and that is why we will build partnerships. We will attract or we will work with technologists and those who have solutions. We will work with those who have money, those who have investments and funds to deploy, and we will need a plethora, a whole kaleidoscope of partnerships that will contribute to our growth. Some would be countries, some would be companies, some would be philanthropies, some would be very talented individuals with solutions, and we will try and attract all of those. That is clearly a driver of India's international engagement, international approaches in the coming years. Now, it's a very different debate, but I don't think India should be throwing a political leader to a kangaroo court. But that's a different matter. We'll talk about that later. But I think India is doing right by not honoring illegal and a kangaroo court. Let elections come. Let a new government emerge elected by the people. Let there be a certain degree of constitutional normalcy in that particular country. Hijack on the streets does not necessarily give legitimacy. Just because you have more people shouting than those who are not doesn't mean that you have a country that has reached a conclusion. So I think on Bangladesh, more to be seen. But I will, on India's role, development is going to be the central driver of what we want to be doing over the next 20 to 25 years. That was the basis of our relationship with countries such as the US, or even earlier with countries such as the USSR. And that's what we worked on.
Good. Please, Anastasia, I'll let you choose again. Maybe in the front row here. And then I'm going to take one. I'll take two now because I've got one in the front row and one here online.
Thank you. My name is Alice Giusto, and I'm China-focused communication specialist. So my question goes back to China.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask you, what do you see are the most acute vulnerabilities, like on India, when it comes to dependence on Chinese like supply chain and like technology, in particular for starting from now on the next years?
I'm going to add one to this, which is coming from the online audience, and it's about India's relationship with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
India is one of the most major, the author writes, one of the major buyers of arms and military equipment from Israel. Many people are becoming more critical of Israel over its actions in Gaza, and many young Americans' attitudes are changing. Are younger Indians also experiencing similar shifts in their view towards Israel? And is there an internal debate within India in the way that there is here in the United States on Israel?
So which one should I respond to, China or Israel? Two very different, two very
Both.
distinct. I'll do both, but let me
China and then Israel.
Look, on Israel, believe you me, there are debates in India. There's a largely inclusive debate on Israel, which means it's not just the young people. I think there are folks across age groups and across demographics and across geographies debating what was happening at that time. Anyone who's online cannot not be a participant in debates on what was happening in Gaza, the October 7 terrorist attacks, and the response thereafter. I think it has occupied mind space in India as well. I can say with a degree of certainty, and I'm being a little careful here, we will have a foreign policy survey coming out in a couple of years, so watch out for that space. But if you were to ask Indian youth who are amongst your top few partners, certainly Israel will be one of those. And that has not changed. We will wait for the next poll that will come out in 2025, but in the 2024 poll, that was still the case. Israel was an important actor. So irrespective of what's happening in the US and in US universities and amongst the US youth, which, by the way, constitute a multinational cohort. It's not an American youth that is debating that. It's an international youth sitting in American universities debating it. I think there's a big difference. Let's see what the Indian youth say. I'm quite certain a very friendly Israel assessment would be reflected in the foreign policy survey that we see. And Israel will continue to see India as one of its close partners and allies in the days ahead. On China dependencies, there is no India-specific vulnerability or dependency. There is a global vulnerability and dependency on China. If you allow a single country to become literally the manufacturing complex for the whole world, all of us will struggle with having certain degrees of independence in our economic operations, right? You saw what the Chinese response was to American attempts to bully it with tariffs. Why? Because the fact was that you allowed China to become the hub for creating, manufacturing, and supplying vital components for what America holds dear to its economy and its future growth. So in some sense, like everyone else in the world, we do have a similar situation where many of our core industries have backward and forward linkages with the Chinese for us to become globally competitive. And by the way, it's not a bad thing. Like I said, an economic embrace with China is not a bad thing. It's the political muscularity that you need to develop to be able to do good business with them. I always tell people that you become politically tough, economic conditions become better with China. It becomes easier to deal with them. So I think that is our vulnerability. We have to build our own capabilities, our own strengths as we engage with the Chinese, and we have to develop our own critical manufacturing sectors. I think, again, like I said, one of the issues that the Trump presidency has raised is not wrong. That certain reshoring or onshoring or friendshoring is required. And I think this has been an American consensus for over 10 years now. He is doing it dramatically, right? But the fact is that that's, again, a right conversation for all of us around the world to be having. That do we need to have certain industries, certain capabilities, certain production located within our territory, within our sovereign control? And I think we are seeing India and other countries engage with that issue. So for example, let me just tell you that most people didn't realize that even when we were having that big conflict with the Chinese on the Himalayan border a few years ago, we were moving a very large chunk of Apple production, including the equipment and plant and machinery, out of China into India. So today, I think you see 1 in 7 or 1 in 5, I don't know the numbers, but you see 1 in 5 or 1 in 7 Apple iPhones being made out of India. But those were originally being produced out of China. So we had to not only move plant and equipment, but we also had to ensure know-how and capability accompanied it as we built up our capabilities here. So we work with them. We are vulnerable to the same dependencies that everyone else is, and we are seeking to overcome it by creating our own national capabilities and focusing on our own sectoral growth in certain areas.
Question right back there. Yes, thank you. And if you say who you are.
Oh, good evening. Thank you for all your insights. I have a lot of interest in India. Actually, earlier today, one of my Indian coworkers had to leave the office early because her best friend had her visa revoked and she has to leave the country in 48 hours. A couple months ago, the administration announced that it wants to charge, it's like $100,000 for H-1B visas. How do you think that this administration's policies on immigration will affect the Indian-American relationship?
No, significantly. I always tell folks that in the 20th century, when our governments did not like each other, we still continued to have deep relationships simply because of the human bridge that we had built. Of smart people, educated folks, of the knowledge economy. People talk about outsourcing and business process. They talk about Bangalore and outsourcing in this century. But the fact was, since the 70s and 80s, we have had a bunch of American and Indians who were looking at building businesses across borders. One of my own relatives did that in the early 80s. Right? So for me, the human bridge is vital. And it's the fact on which our relationship was based. Can you imagine that we were on two other sides of the world debate in the 20th century? You had one change in policy in both capitals, and it took us less than 6 hours to become best friends and embrace each other and find ways of celebrating and doing things together. It was simply because we had that human bridge in place. And we could change the course of history very quickly because people on both sides were able to exploit the new opportunities that were presented. If we lose that, we lose something special. If we lose that, we lose much of the entrepreneurial and innovation energy that America has built up, and we lose much of our own innovation nexus and pipelines that we have built with America. But look, what is likely to happen? I'll tell you what is likely to happen. If you see a 30 to 40% drop in Indian students coming into America, who's going to pick it up? The Germans will pick it up. The Germans are going to take 25,000 more Indian students each year, which they are, by the way. Now, they are targeting 1 million Indians by 2030. They want to take more folks. We have German universities and German leaders coming and telling Indians, come there, we'll give you a 4-year blue visa. So we have this large expansion of Indian population now traveling to Europe, traveling to Australia, traveling to different parts of the world. Indians are knowledge hungry. They will still find a base. And I think in some sense, perhaps you will see new geographies of Indian interest emerge, courtesy our wonderful people who are expeditionary and adventurous and bold to go and seek knowledge and skills in different parts of the world. So, and I hope some of them also keep coming back to India, because today we need more talent than ever. India in the 20th century at $1 trillion or less of GDP had a different capability of absorbing talented folks. India at 5, 10, $15 trillion in the next 10, 15 years is going to be requiring hundreds and millions of people contributing to it. So I hope this is also the moment when our government can create a program where we actually start attracting on a voluntary basis the best talent back. I always tell people that if we have a performance-linked incentive given to a manufacturing sector, we should take a small fraction of that budget. So when we give our industry $4 billion for manufacturing semiconductor, let's keep a $40 million budget out of the $4 billion for attracting the best talent back at American salaries, at global salaries, and make them work in India out of a small budget. I think it's also a good time for us to think about actually creating a scheme where we incentivize the best to come back. At this time, we need them. At maybe 10 years ago, they were more beneficial for us by creating value outside and helping build India from there. Today, we need them to be inside India and building India. So I think, look, it's going to change the architecture. I think at some point, the Americans are going to say it's not a good idea. And I don't think that policies are going to necessarily follow through. President Trump is wise and rational, and he's never hesitated to change his own mind if he sees something, and contradict himself if the moment so desires. So I don't think that everything he says is necessarily set in stone, and that's why agreements with America is not necessarily a wise thing today. So anyone who signed tariff agreements and trade agreements with America should not believe that they are worth the paper they are signed on, because he will change his mind, and it's good to be in a permanent conversation with him. So I like the place we are in. Someone told me, but they've given you the best ambassador. I said, we are giving the maximum tariff. We are giving the maximum tariff. We should get the best ambassador from the US. They gave us a very nice, one of Trump's favorite person is coming to India as ambassador. So
Say the name.
Yeah. Sorry?
Who is it? Sorry?
He's already been announced with much fanfare. So my response to them was that they've given us a person very close to the president because we are giving maximum tariff. We demand the best service.
This has been tremendous. We do need to conclude. I mean, the only thing I would add to what you've said is that, and I hear this so many times, like, Trump will change his mind, we'll come back, everything, this is a moment. And of course, what we all know, and, we know from the gentleman who just asked the question, there are a lot of people who are, who don't get the second moment, right? Their opportunity, their chance, their lives, their livelihood, their children, their investments are here and now being hit. And so America and India may well be fine in the medium term. But my God, there's some disruption along the way.
I did not mean to convey that.
No, I know you didn't.
My point was that we are in for a tough period which is going to extend much beyond Trump. The aftershocks on the relationship are deep. We were reaching a moment when we began to actually like you and trust you.
You, the country.
I mean, not you. You we always liked. You also we like the country. So no, I'm talking about an abstract terms. And both of us, to be honest. And we have let loose forces that have damaged that warm, fuzzy feeling that we had begun to enjoy with each other. A degree of comfort. And we will have to rebuild that. So it's not about waiting the Trump presidency or making him change his mind or waiting for him to change. It's not about that. I think the undergirding has been hurt. And we will have to repair that, which will take some time. But that is where Chicago Council and ORF should partner and architect a new India-US partnership that is fit for the 21st century.
I think that's a brilliant place to end. It's actually spot on, and it speaks to the incredible importance of transnational ties, civil society, universities, think tanks like ours, and really investing in those connections so that when there is a moment for a more easy official relationship, there's a lot to continue to underpin it. So, Samir, thanks for making the trip and your team. Dhruva, nice to have the Consul General from India here. Never the same without you, Tanubi. And thanks everybody for being here. This has been tremendous. Samir, especially you. Thank you.
Thank you.